Hey everyone, welcome to part 1 of how to paint watercolor wildflowers for beginners. My name is Alexandra, I'm a watercolor artist, and today I'm going to be teaching you how to paint an Indian paintbrush, also known as red paintbrush. These are honestly one of my favorite wildflowers, and it's not just because it has the word paintbrush in the name, but partly. I live in BC currently, so I do a ton of hiking kind of in and around the BC Alberta area, and in the springtime this is actually one of my favorite flowers to see. Just has such a vibrant red color, so when I see the contrast between the flower and just the grass and the mountains, it's so stunning. So I'm excited to share this with you guys today. Let's get started. For paint today, I'm going to use Art Philosophy & Co. watercolor paints. The paint that I'm using today, the palette is called Terrain. The 3 colors of paint we're going to use in this painting is Sourwood Red, Balsam, and Vine Leaf. For paintbrushes today, I have Opus Allegro number 4 and number 0. If you guys use a bigger and a really skinny paintbrush, if they're not the exact same size, that's okay, that'll work. For paper, I'm using 140-pound cold press watercolor paper. 2 cups of water, 1 for clean water and 1 for dirty water, and a napkin to dry off your paintbrush as you're painting. Alright, so to start, the first thing I'm going to get you guys to do is get some red paint. Again, I'll be using a mix of colors, so it'll be some of the sourwood color from here. We're going to paint this flower in layers, so the first layer that we're going to do is going to be pretty light. So you can see I'm adding water just so that it's not too dark. Test it on my napkin there. And again, the nice thing about this one is you can kind of just think of how a paintbrush looks. So what I'm going to be doing is loose downward strokes. And they're all not necessarily even. I'll leave some white gaps in between just to add texture. So you'll see I'm bringing the strokes down and in. And again, the color is really light just because we're gonna layer as we go. So I'm just filling them in and doing some strokes kind of in the middle. So with these, there's not really a specific way that you need to necessarily hold your paintbrush or focus on the angles and things like that. We're just aiming to get lines downward. All right, so that is the first step. We'll add some more we'll add some more petals as we go, but we're just gonna start with that one for now, and the next thing that we're gonna do is paint our stem. So I'm just going to rinse off my brush. I was using my number 4 paintbrush for that. Now I'm going to switch to my 0 to get a nice fine line. And then just get my colors here. So I am going to use Vine Leaf for the stem, and I might mix it a little bit with the Balsam. So you'll notice for this one I'm getting more paint onto my paintbrush just because it's going to be a darker line. And we're going to start at the flower. You can even start almost right on top of it. And we're going to do a nice, not necessarily straight line going down just to keep it having a nice natural look. And now because I want to add a few more flowers coming off of it, I'm going to do a couple more stems branching off the side. So again, I'm using really pigmented paint on my paintbrush to get a nice dark color for this. All right, so the next thing we're gonna do is go back to our number 4 paintbrush. And we're just gonna paint 2 more little flowers on each side. So these ones, one of them I'm gonna do, so again, really watery paint here. We're using the wet on wet technique. The first one I'm gonna do will look sort of like it's closed, like it hasn't opened up yet. So I'm doing downward strokes. And this one's really small. So you'll see I bring it in as I come towards where the stem is. And again, I'm leaving some white spaces. So essentially you're just painting lines downward. This one I'll make it a little bit bigger. So this is just a mini version of the big flower that we had done here. Again, really watery paint because we want to be able to add layers to it as we go. All right, so I have you guys jumping around a little bit just because we need to let layers dry before we add more depth to the next ones. So the next thing that we're going to paint is the leaves. So I'm going to go back into the same colors I was using before. We had the vine leaf and balsam. Again, we're using a wet on wet technique, so you'll see I'm mixing it on my palette here. It's kind of a creamy texture. I have water on my paintbrush, but not too much. We'll just test it on our napkin there. So the leaves for these ones are a little bit longer and skinnier. So if you guys have watched my basic watercolor leaves video, you'll see sort of the technique for this. We're gonna start by using the tip of our paintbrush on the paper, and we're gonna apply pressure as we pull back, but we wanna keep the leaf skinnier. So I'm just gonna bring it to more of a point and go over it there. And I'm not doing a straight line back, I'm giving it a bit of a curve. So we'll just add a few of these. Do another one up here. So tip of my paintbrush, applying pressure as I pull back. And it doesn't necessarily need to attach right to the stem. So we'll do another one here. I'm going to give it a bit of a curve. Now I'm going to go in and apply pressure. So we're doing some long skinny leaves. Do another one over here. And again, with these wildflowers, we want them to look more natural, so none of the lines are really perfectly straight. Now what I can do is go back in with a bit of a darker green. So I'm just taking the balsam color here, just adding it into the leaves to give them some more depth. So these leaves had already dried a bit, so I'm gonna go rinse off my paintbrush, rinse it back off in the clean water. And what I'm just gonna do with my wet paintbrush is go over top just to get the colors to mix in a bit better. So I'm re-wetting my leaf just to get the colors to bleed a bit into each other. Now we'll go add in after and add some more color to those to just give them some more detail. All right, so we're gonna go back to the flowers now. I'm actually gonna switch to my smaller paintbrush just for these details. So what I want you guys to do is go back into your red paint, and we're still using the wet on wet technique, but I want you guys to have a lot of paint on your paintbrush and not too much water. So I'll just test it on my napkin, and I want to see a really bright red. All right, so now we're going in and adding shading. So what you're gonna do is using the very skinny part of your paintbrush, you're just gonna add little lines. And I had a little bit too much water on there, so I'm gonna take some off. And I'm just adding lines on top. So you'll see I'm doing them in little patches. And the more that you add, you'll see it start to build and look more 3D. Yeah, so if you find that there's too much water on your paintbrush, you can just go back and dry it off on your napkin. So with these lines, I don't necessarily need to follow the shapes that I already have. I can follow some of them, and then with others, I can just go on top in a different direction. So again, we're just doing lines in a downward stroke, and everything is kind of coming to a point towards the bottom. So it'll be wider at the top, and it's pointing inwards and downwards. All right, so I'm going to do the same thing for the other two flowers now. So you'll see right away, you can tell the difference with these flowers and how much more lively they look as soon as you add the next layer. All right, so with the leaves, what we're gonna do now is add a bit more detail. So I'm using my small brush, I'm putting green on it, and I'm actually gonna mix a little bit of red into the green. This just gives it a bit more of a natural color. If you guys know what these flowers look like out in the wild, you'll see that they're not, that the leaves have a bit of a darker tone to them. So by mixing the red and the green, that gives it that natural looking color. And again, we're gonna kind of follow the same concept as we did with these flowers. We're just gonna start, but this time we're gonna start from the bottom, and we're just gonna paint some lines going up. So this is just one technique that I use for shading. And by adding that little bit of red in there, it kind of draws your eye to the leaves. So again, I'm just doing really small little lines in here. And if you don't want the look to be as kind of stiff, you can go back in with some clean water and just blend it together a bit more. Now I'm going to go in kind of with the same red-green mixture and just go over the stem a little bit. So I'm not necessarily going all the way down, I'm just going to cover parts of it with it. So again, this is just a way to add some shading. All right, so next thing we're going to do is just add some leaves to the base of our flowers. So I'm going in more with the green color here. And this is pretty simple. So from the stem where it attaches to the flower, we're just going to do some lines going into the flower. Again, this part doesn't need to necessarily look too specific, just to get some green in there. So I'm just doing little strokes attaching the stem to the flower. And it can kind of mix in with the red, that's okay. All right, and the last thing that we have to do is, if you haven't already, I have some of my leaves attached to the stem here and some of them not quite. So I'm going in with my really tiny paintbrush and I'm just going to do a little line attaching them to the stem. Yeah, so you'll see with flowers like this, it's really easy. You can honestly just keep adding more and more details until you're happy with where it ends up. I try to start with a really light color underneath so that I can kind of build on that. So for both the leaves and the flowers, we do that. If I wanted to, I could even go back in with an even darker, deeper red into the flower parts of this. Yeah, but maybe I'll show you guys that in a future video. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed. Thanks for joining, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, subscribe, and comment below what wildflower you'd like to learn next. Also, I would love to see what you guys are painting and learning, so if you followed along, make sure to share what you've painted and tag me on Instagram at Alexandra Victoria Studio. See you next time.